Evidence for evolution. Stop following me. Living things have been evolving on Earth for millions of years. Evidence for this process can be found in the fossil record, the geographical distribution of living species, homologous structures of living organisms, similarities in early development, embryonic development, and molecular biology. We're going to take each one of these separately and talk about them. So first of all, the fossil record. The Earth is billions of years old, and fossils in different layers of rock, sedimentary rock, showed evidence of gradual change over time. Why sedimentary, David?
It's because all the other kinds of rock would destroy the bones.
Excellent. They'd get heated up and pressurized, and the fossils would be destroyed. The next one is the geographic distribution of living species. There are different animals on different continents, but they have similar adaptations to shared environments. So, for example, the Tasmanian wolf was a marsupial related to kangaroos. It had a pouch, and it was not closely related to wolves. So you're more closely related to a wolf, and the wolf is more closely related to you and a bunny rabbit than it would be to the Tasmanian wolf. So they looked and acted very much the same because they adapted to the same niche or role. So they have something called analogous structures. These are structures that are different in basic structure, but the same in function or form. So they look the same because they have the same job, even though their common ancestor is so long ago that their common ancestor didn't look anything like them. So if you do a cladogram, here's you, and here's a wolf, and here's a rabbit, and here's this guy, Tasmanian wolf. So they're not very closely related, yet they look so much more alike than either of them do to anything else. And that's because they have the same job. They do not show evolutionary relationships, but they do provide evidence of evolution for natural selection because natural selection has selected these same forms. Yeah, same traits. Excellent. Here's another example of that. Here's a sugar glider from Australia and a flying squirrel from North America. Anyway, again, not very closely related. They have a bunch of analogous structures to make them do kind of the same thing, and they look very much alike. So these animals are not closely related, but they look and behave alike because they evolved to do well in a certain niche. The next one is homologous body structures. These are structures that have different mature forms but develop from the same embryonic tissues and from a common
ancestor.
Okay. So, for example, all four-limbed animals with backbones descended with modification from a common ancestor. Here's another example of homologous structures. The whale, the cat, the bat, and the gorilla. They have the same kind of forelimb, but they do different things. The whale
swims,
the cat
walks,
the bat
flies,
and the gorilla
walks.
Not on his forearms much. Well, maybe a little bit, huh?
Well, he goes like pounds.
Yeah, I guess he kind of does. But he also grabs stuff and eats bananas with
them
them and
stuff. And the cat also
stuff.
uses its claws to rip the throats down.
Yeah, that's true. Notice that they all have the same first bone, the humerus, and then they have a radius and an ulna, and they have these wrist bones, and they all have these red finger bones. So these are all homologous structures showing that they had some common ancestor with all of those bones.
Do you think that that's the right hand of the whale or the left hand?
I think that's the left hand because it looks like this is the front and the back, so I think that's going to be the left hand.
I don't know, I think that's the right hand.
I don't think so. Are these structures homologous or analogous? We've got a butterfly's wing, a bat's wing, a bird's wing, and a pterosaur's wing. Are they homologous?
Sorry, they're analogous.
They're analogous, good.
But they evolved from a common ancestor, just not a flying common ancestor.
Right, their common ancestor didn't have the same derived trait, and it was a very long time ago.
Their common ancestor, I think, swam.
Yes, probably.
Because they're insects.
Not all homologous structures serve an important function. So, for example, vestigial organs, like an appendix. Like an appendix. So let's talk about that first. Here's the large intestine that you all studied. And that mainly serves to form. Do you know what the large intestine does?
It takes it not eats, it digests then takes the nutrients out of all the food and turns it into crap?
Yeah, actually, the small intestine takes most of the nutrients out. This really forms
okay.
poop.
Okay.
You're right, and it takes water out of the feces as well. Here's the appendix, and in a rabbit, do you know what it does?
It breaks down grass, but there's another term for
Yep, it breaks down grass, the cellulose. Yep.
Cellulose.
Yep.
That's what it was.
In us, it doesn't do that. We don't digest cellulose. For a long time we thought it did nothing, which is why it would be called a vestigial organ. We think it might have an immune function now, but certainly you can certainly live without one of those. Another one is the nictitating membrane. Here's an owl, and that nictitating membrane, do you know what that's for?
It's for keeping the dust out of its eyes when it's like dived on.
Oh, yeah.
Do owls dive? Oh yeah, owls do.
Sure they do. Yep. So it protects the eye when it's flying. Same thing with a horse, except when it's running. We don't have one of those, but we have this semilunar fold that's probably a vestigial nictitating membrane, just doesn't go over the eye anymore. Here's another vestigial organ. It's bones that would have been part of a hind limb in this whale many generations ago. The next one is similarities in early development. Embryonic structures of different species show significant similarities. So here's a sea ray, a pond turtle, a chicken, a domestic cat, and that one's a human, actually. Isn't it cute?
Is a sea lamprey thing is it just like a ray that...
No, this one I think, I have to look that one up. You have to ask me hard questions in these, David.
Okay.
You know what? I think it's not. I think it's more like an eel, but I'd have to double check that.
I was just wondering why it didn't have eyes.
I think it's an eel, but I have to double check it. I'm sorry.
Right.
So they all have these pharyngeal slits, even us, or the same kind of area here, which means we all have these genes that we don't even use anymore. Yeah, and the reason this happens is because, well, first of all, it shows a common ancestor. And the reason it happens is that mutations in embryonic development are usually disastrous. So variations in embryonic development are usually very small. If you have a mutation that affects the embryo, it's a lot of times really bad, so that embryo would die. Usually the mutations are going to affect the rate of growth of different things. So for example, the chimpanzee and the human fetus kind of look alike, don't they?
Yep.
Whereas the adult and the human the adult chimpanzee and the human adult don't look that much alike. But you can see here, if you have some mutations to the rate of growth and you don't grow the face quite so much, but you grow the head some more, you can see how regulatory mutations in regulatory genes could probably affect a population a lot. The last one is molecular evidence. This is similarity in
to the DNA.
DNA. Very good. Whoops. In DNA. And you know that DNA makes what?
RNA.
And RNA makes?
Protein.
Very good. And so you don't have to study DNA for molecular evidence. You can study proteins because proteins are really a reflection of DNA. So you can see this is the cytochrome oxidase gene. So that's an enzyme that even a yeast has and we have. And a human and a pig share a lot of, let's see, our DNA is much more similar than a human and a yeast. So there's only a 13% difference for this particular gene between a human and a pig. There's a 17% difference between a human and a duck, a 20% difference between a human and a snake, and a 66% difference between a human and a yeast. So that's why you can see our common ancestor was much longer ago. The interesting thing here is that we do share a common ancestor, and you can see that although 66% of our DNA is different, there's still some of our DNA for this gene that's the same. And here's one more example of that. Mutations in the DNA sequence of 7 related species of tropical fish. This one's showing that these two are probably the most closely related because they don't have any differences in their DNA.
And yet those 3 share deletions, so they're probably...
So these 3 are probably more closely related.
And the other one that doesn't have deletions probably pretty closely related to
right. This one might be more closely related to that. And these mutations may be
advantageous.
Right. Maybe they were random and happened to be in the same place, but they give some advantage, and so they happened in both. And that's where we're going to stop.